Well, good afternoon. Happy Sabbath. Well, many of you have probably seen a TV show or a movie where a character deals with an internal conflict. They may portray a good and bad version of that person on each shoulder, trying to convince them to maybe give them advice, a choice between right and wrong, or good and evil. And this pull is so strong between the two choices that they waver and constantly second guess and doubt what they should do. Unless they are talking to their shoulders, we can't see when someone is dealing with an internal struggle. And many times that person doesn't even fully realize it themselves. This is a time when having two minds is not better than one. And the book of James describes this as being double-minded and warns us against this way of thinking. So today, we will look at the warning in James against being double-minded and what we can do to overcome it. So what is being double-minded? It doesn't mean that you have twice the brain power. In fact, it's like two opposite opinions that negate constructive thinking until a choice is made. And then you change your mind again. Well, double-minded in the Greek is only used 2 times in the Bible and only in the book of James. And it means two-spirited, or having two souls, divided in mind or thought and alternating between opinions and purpose. The Hebrew word, which is only used once in the book of Psalms, means skeptical or divided in mind. And the word for doubt actually comes from the root word for double. Well, let's turn to James chapter 1 and look at what he says about being double-minded. In the context, just before we get into verse 5, is that James is admonishing the reader to find joy in trials by having your faith tested, which leads to patience. And then if we look at James chapter 1 and verse 5, here he says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for he who doubts is like a wave of the sea driven and tossed by the wind. For let not that man suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways." So we see a few things here. We can ask God for wisdom, and God will give it to us. Doubt and faith are complete opposites. And being double-minded causes instability in all areas of our life, including prayer. So an example might be someone's praying, asking God, "God, please give me wisdom." Will he really give me wisdom? James said he would, so he should. How can I trust James? Well, James is an apostle. He's trustworthy. Does God really hear my prayer? You can see that sort of conflicts that this person's having. Maybe they're not talking to their shoulders, but they have this inside of them, always questioning, always doubting. Well, God doesn't want to be friends with someone like that. Would you want to be friends with someone who's constantly questioning where they are, what they're doing? Are you friendly? Are you their friend? Well, when we are uncertain with our relationship with God, then we become unstable in many areas of our life. We have no solid foundation, and we may doubt God, what he says, and what he will do for us. Well, Adam Clark's commentary on this verse states, "The man of two souls who has one for earth and another for heaven, who wishes to secure both worlds, a man of this character is continually distracted. He will neither let earth nor heaven go, and yet he can have but one." So it paints a vivid picture of someone straining to hold on to two things that are gradually growing further and further apart. So what can you do? What is the solution? Well, it starts with you and what is in your heart. Is there something you are having a hard time letting go of? Are there any traces of pride lingering there, holding you back from fully choosing God's way of life? Let's turn over to James chapter 4 and verse 7. James chapter 4 and verse 7. Here James says, "Therefore submit to God, resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts." The word purify here is actually sanctify. Sanctify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to gloom. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will lift you up. So as I mentioned, sanctify means to set apart and consecrate for God. A double-minded person needs to sanctify their heart through humility and submission to God. It's an ongoing process of trusting God, believing in him, choosing to do the right thing, and then act on it. When we focus and meditate on our love for God's ways, his truth, his way of life, and plan for us, we can see how much God cares for us and loves us. Remember the times God intervened in your life, the blessings you have, the wonderful calling and future before you. Then you will not doubt him or become uncertain if he hears you. You will have a clearer understanding of his will and will pray with faith. So write down a list of your blessings and miracles from God that have happened in your life, and miracles that have happened to other people that you know. Then you have it on hand when the doubts arise. You have the written list, and just refer to it when the doubts creep in. So once you have purified your heart or sanctified it, the next step is to put your faith and prayer into action by showing love to your neighbor. In James chapter 2, verse 26, he says, "For as the body without the spirit is dead, so faith without works is dead also." So it's a combination of faith and works by putting your faith into practice. The book of James mentions a few examples throughout. He says, "Visit orphans and widows. Control what you say. Feed and clothe the poor. Show patience, and pray for one another." Well, let's turn to James chapter 5, and let's look at what he says about prayer. James 5 and verse 13. Here James says, "Is anyone among you suffering? Let him pray. Is anyone cheerful? Let him sing psalms. Is anyone among you sick? Let him call for the elders of the church, and let them pray over him, anointing him with oil in the name of the Lord. And the prayer of faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise him up. And if he has committed sins, he will be forgiven. Confess your trespasses to one another and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man avails much." So we got to pray for those who are suffering or sick so that they will be healed. Pray fervently with faith. Put your faith into action by showing love to your neighbor, by providing for their physical needs, and through prayer. So maybe you need a general guideline of maybe a few questions you want to ask yourself before you ask something of God through prayer. Here's one. Am I asking according to his will? You can look at 1 John 5, verse 14. 2. Is my attitude in life in tune with the will of God? You can look at 1 John 3, verse 22. And a third point or guideline is the request self-centered or God-centered? And you can look at James chapter 4 and verse 3. So if you go through and you can answer yes to these questions, or it is God-centered that you're trying to ask for, then you're likely on the right track. If not, then you may need to reevaluate your request. So in summary, we all deal with internal conflict and doubts from time to time, but we can't remain that way. Otherwise, we could become double-minded. unstable in life, doubting and questioning our relationship with God. So we need to prepare by purifying our hearts in humility, remembering the blessings and miracles from God by writing them down, and putting faith into action by showing love for our neighbor. Let us encourage one another to be single-minded in our hearts, in our minds, and our prayers to God.